Hi, and welcome to this lesson on Teams at Speed, aligning to the manifesto. So we just learned about how we need to make sure that our teams are remaining independent. Well, the best way to do that is to look to the Agile Manifesto and to see whether or not your decisions when it comes to how to build your program are aligning with its values. I know this sounds a little bit like a religion, but it's actually a reality. This is an extremely well designed manifesto and statement, and in fact, the priority in which you should align your teams actually goes within the order of the manifesto statement and values. So let's go ahead and dive into it so we can learn a little bit more. So first, the four primary strategies to scaling teams actually align to this Agile Manifesto. The first statement of the Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The second statement is that we want to go over them for working software over comprehensive documentation. The third statement is that we want customer collaboration over contract negotiation and setting of rules. And then fourth is we want to respond to change over following a plan. So if we take a look at what this means for scaling strategies, well, the first strategy is actually to isolate and absorb dependencies between teams wherever possible. This allows you to keep your teams small and to reduce all the integration points so that you can maintain individuals and their interactions over having tooling and processing in order to integrate. Second, whenever you need to have dependencies across teams, it's better to have them all planned at once and for the teams to move together as a solution train. And in fact, this is something that's made very popular by the Scaled Agile framework. And this is where we use big room planning so that teams are releasing work together and they're always doing their work together. Third, when you can't work asynchronously, you at least need to make sure there's collaboration going on between the teams. And so this is where we add in what are called dotted line teams. These are teams without delivery responsibility, but instead they support the delivery teams. And they do that by pulling forward designs and doing architecture, or by working ahead of the teams and building out apparatus for testing and integration. And then lastly, when you absolutely have to, you can add phases at the beginning and at the end of your project so that you start off by defining the solution and figuring out how you're going to build it. And then at the very end, you are able to integrate and adjust for any changes that happen during implementation. This is when the teams just cannot work together. So let's take a look at each one of these strategies and how they can be implemented. So we want to isolate and absorb dependencies wherever possible. This is the number one approach. Teams that can work independently are able to build and test features and get that feedback as quickly as possible. This allows us to group functions that actually create value and release them faster. If you'll remember, this is the reason why Agile uses a decoupled architecture. It allows for features to be independent of each other in terms of the services that they use. This means that small changes have really small costs and that you can release incremental features without any concern over the future use of those features. And as a result, yes, there's a little bit of a higher cost at first, but you get so much faster, it's totally worth it. It results in what's called replicated functionality or degenerative systems, where you may have two or more services that actually have the same or similar function. An example here is that you may have the car ignition that will actually power up the windows and say roll them up or roll them down. You may also have window controls that are able to do the same thing. That kind of replication is something we see all the time in our biological systems, two eyes, two ears, a nose and a mouth that can breathe, but we don't build it within our mechanical systems to our detriment. If we did so, we could use redundancy to create robust performance in the real world and completely allow our teams to move as fast as they can. This approach means that you need to have a way to scale that is isolated and absorbed between the teams. Well, the best way to do that is to make sure that you're starting off with everything that Agile needs from the beginning. A shared vision, whole teams that are able to communicate face to face, which means that you've got the designers, the builders, the testers, everyone's on these small teams. They can incrementally deliver work and they can continuously test and integrate their work. These are the keys for making Agile work effectively. The way that we see this thing scale is using what's called a Scrum of Scrums model. The Scrum of Scrums is good for independent teams, and what it looks like is that you'll say have 3 development teams, which will send all of their Scrum Masters to the Scrum of Scrum meeting, and they'll send their product owners to the Meta Scrum meeting. So you have a Scrum of Scrum meeting for Scrum Masters and a Meta Scrum meeting for product owners. And if they get higher, you can have the Meta Scrum, and you can have the Scrum of Scrums. And these things just build on each other as much as you need, essentially always decreasing the amount of integration, and usually on the order of about up to 5 teams per Scrum of Scrum. So the way that we can isolate dependencies is with planning and design assumptions. So isolation means that you're allowed to keep teams away from each other simply through better planning and design. Planning would be things like, we're going to have teams work on different parts of the car so that there'll be no conflict in testing the car parts. For design, it would be things like, we're going to make sure that the engine is powerful enough to replenish the battery, and we're not going to worry about having any testing between those two. We're simply going to have enough buffer in the power of the engine, which is usually a safe bet. When it comes to absorbing dependencies, you can do that with extra resources or with over-designing. So for example, teams need all the skills on the team, and maybe not everyone's going to be fully utilized all the time. That's fine. It's okay to have a few people who aren't always engaged. They're there as backup. You can also have design buffer in your systems as well. And this comes into play when it comes to safety factors, such as overbuilding a system so that you know that the structure of the car is always going to be strong enough in which to handle the torque from the engine, or that you're going to always make sure that the rocket's capsule is going to be over-designed for whatever entry path it's going to take on its actual mission.